And let's bring back John Sale and Jessica Roth. And also joining us now, political strategist and attorney Richard Goodstein. Thank you all again for being here. Richard, welcome. I'll start with you and get your reaction to what we've been reporting as far as this cross-examination involving David Pecker.
Yeah, the reason that this is significant from a criminal law standpoint is that when it came to these other catch and kill stories, they weren't talking about pardons afterwards. They weren't talking about being mindful of criminal law violations when it came to Hollywood celebrities that they might catch and kill their stories. They did here. And I think the reason we should expect to hear from Stormy Daniels is because she can give voice to kind of the frenzy after Access Hollywood and what it was that was kind of motivating them, which was all about the campaign and nothing about poor Melania's feelings. And let's not forget, Trump's not going to testify, so this will all be unrebutted. Whatever she has to say, that sleaze and the context of the campaign, that's going to sit out there unrebutted because Trump, we know, won't be able to testify because he's just too vulnerable as a witness.
John, why do you think they're spending so much time on Karen McDougal, Dino the doorman, when it's Stormy Daniels' situation that is so central to the indictment?
I think, like Jessica said, they want to set the stage for a conspiracy. But the DA is taking the position that this is not about hush money. That's legal. It's not about NDAs. That's legal. It's about interference with an election. But the more we hear about strippers, the more we hear about Playboy models, it is about extramarital affairs, and it is about hush money. And I think the jury is going to start saying, is this something we really care about? Is this a criminal violation? We haven't heard anything yet about how was the Stormy Daniels transaction booked. That's the underlying crime first, before we get to the election interference. Haven't had one word about that yet.
And so, Jessica, we know David Pecker has said he entered this cooperating agreement in 2019 with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Do you believe other witnesses could also have received these cooperating agreements?
We don't know yet. I mean, that was the first time that that was revealed, that he personally had a non-prosecution agreement to testify. We already knew that AMI had a non-prosecution agreement with federal prosecutors, but we learned that David Pecker personally has this non-prosecution agreement with the DA's office that subjects him to prosecution for perjury if he perjures himself, but otherwise immunizes him from prosecution for his involvement in the schemes that he's testifying to. Whether other people have such non-prosecution agreements, I don't see any indication of that. Obviously, Michael Cohen has his own history. He does not have a non-prosecution agreement. He does never signed up as a cooperator by either the U.S. Attorney's Office or the DA's office. I'm not sure who those other individuals would be who might have that kind of immunity, but we'll have to see, because we got that surprise yesterday with respect to Pecker in terms of his own personal deal.
Yeah, so we're only now hearing from witness number one, David Pecker. We've been told that there will be potentially, a dozen witnesses for the prosecution to eventually take the stand. We haven't heard from Stormy Daniels or Michael Cohen or Hope Hicks, whose name came up today, as we understand it. Who do you think, Richard, Trump would be most fearful of to hear their testimony?
Hope Hicks. Look, she could conceivably have been threatened with a conspiracy charge because if the reports are true, that she was in on these calls talking about the cover-up and how to book it and so forth. I mean, she was personally vulnerable. We'll find out. But she was like a daughter to Donald Trump. She traveled everywhere with him. She was on that campaign plane when it was like the two of them and maybe Kellyanne Conway. And she knew where the bodies were buried. She knew the dirt on Donald Trump. I have to imagine that if she takes that stand, it will be scary and mortifying for Trump to sit there knowing that he's muzzled, he can't say anything in response, and he doesn't want to offend her, and yet he knows what she knows. That seems to be the biggest risk to him.
John, who do you think the next witness will be?
They're going to call anybody who they think can corroborate Michael Cohen, because Michael Cohen, recently, a very respected federal judge, Judge Furman, wrote in an order that he thinks Michael Cohen may have committed perjury recently. Michael Cohen, there was never a camera, never a TV show he didn't go on. Now, I don't blame the media for that. He was a great find. But I have never seen, either as a prosecutor or a defense lawyer, a cooperator go on TV time and time again before they testify, just to demonstrate his bias against Trump and his desire to make Trump go down. I think they're going to devastate Michael Cohen on cross.
So you don't think he'll be the next one up. Jessica, who do you think will be the next one?
I think if it were me trying the case, I would try to really shore up what David Pecker has said thus far about the scheme that he was involved in. And so if Hope Hicks is available and can really corroborate what David Pecker has said thus far, and she'd be a strong witness, then I would go to her next, because I would sort of lock down those facts that David Pecker has given us and corroborate them, and then later move into the Stormy Daniels part of the story. But it depends how much time they have left. You want to end strong before the weekend, and so it depends how much longer we have of cross of David Pecker, how long will be the redirect. If they have only a short window of time, maybe they want to do a short records custodian witness just to sort of get that in and done before the weekend and leave David Pecker's testimony primarily in the jury's mind over the weekend. So it depends who's available to them given their schedules, how long they have to do it, and how strong they think, for example, Hope Hicks might be.
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly. I think if they only have a short period of time and they can put her up there, even if it's not to finish, really just to kind of tease, have the jury sit with that over the weekend with some idea about what's to come. I mean, and frankly, Trump himself, I think, starts dissolving even more and gets more unhinged than he already has, knowing, oh my God, she's really going there. She's really cooperating with this prosecution. He probably until this moment isn't sure. Although I'm sure he's put feelers out. But I think once he knows that that's been established, that's a frightening possibility for him.
Let's hear from Trump and how he seems to be, I guess, internalizing what's happened in the court. This was him just yesterday.
I'm testifying. I tell the truth. I mean, all I can do is tell the truth.
Are you more or less likely, you think, to take the stand in the Manhattan case right now? I know.
Well, I would if it's necessary.
Okay, so those were two different clips, obviously. One was yesterday. The other was previously. So, John, we heard him in the first clip, which was earlier. I don't know if this week or last. I'm trying to remember now. It all runs together, you know. But he was saying, I absolutely will take the stand. Now he's saying, if necessary. What does that tell you?
Well, the decision is his. It's not the lawyers. But any good lawyer, and he's got good lawyers, will beg him, yell at him, scream at him, do whatever. Do not testify. But he doesn't have to testify because he'll hold his press conference outside every day, play to the bigger political audience, but he's not testifying. In the Mueller investigation, he kept saying, I want to talk to them. I really want to talk to them. But my lawyers won't let me. Then I'll answer written questions. The clock ran out. He never talked to them. He never intended to. He's not testifying here.
You know, though, Richard, Trump has often indicated he thinks he's his best messenger and that he can be convincing to the American people versus his aides, or in this case, to a jury, perhaps. Do you think it's possible he would want to testify?
I think he's smart enough. Look, remember when he said during the campaign, if you take the fifth, it means you're lying. And then he proceeded to take the fifth dozens and dozens of times in a case that was videotaped. We've seen this. So, look, I don't know that anybody takes what he says and attaches any weight to it. He's just such a liar. And he has said, I don't lie about things. And if you're the prosecution, you could spend days going through all the things we know. Talk about COVID, about whatever that he's lied about. And so I just think, I agree with John, either he insists, overbears his lawyer's will, and insists he takes the stand. I don't see that happening. And I think if he does, I could see the lawyer basically saying, I'm out. And his freedom is at stake here in a way that in other contexts, when he's tried to assert himself, say he's his own best messenger, the stakes haven't been as high as they are here. And he's got not just this case, but others to worry about down the road about whether he would testify there. And again, I just think he just makes, he faces a perjury charge if he takes a stand. So I just don't see it, notwithstanding his braggadocio about how great a messenger he is.